Welcome back. Thank you for joining me here. This is white oak from the sawmill. You might remember about 2 years ago I made a oak table, farmhouse table, and this is the wood from that same lot. And now it's much more dry. And a buddy of mine needs a countertop for a spec house he's working on, which is interesting because it was a spec house. It's not his personal decision, but it's just something that he thought of, fantasized about, and thought it would be cool. And he just kept saying, well, whoever the client is who's going to buy the house is going to like it. Typically, the client, if it's really for them, wouldn't be as willing to be creative, if you understand what I mean. And so I'm just cutting these about 3 inches longer, maybe 2 inches longer than I really need. So I'm not being too sloppy, but I'm not being overly accurate. And I just need to hit the mark. And you see there I measured to make sure I had the right amount of planks. And now this is my 1911 crescent joiner, 18 inches wide with Babbitt bearings, and this thing is a monster. It's got 2 blades on the spinning mandrel. It does not have a helical head, which is very expensive. I've looked into having it replaced. One of these days I'll do it. I'm just waiting for that little extra $3,000 laying around. And I'm jointing both sides, which obviously isn't typically what you would do because you would joint one side and then table saw the other. But it didn't matter. I just wanted these planks to look a little rustic, and it didn't matter if one of them was tapered or not because my buddy said, just make it look rustic. He liked the saw marks in it, so I was just playing along. And I jointed each side, I said, and you could see here the gap over the blade as it dissipates. And it was a big bow in that, so the front and the back. And you'll notice here how like the front of that board was up in the air, and it's hard to joint a board when the crown is down. I'm no expert on jointing, but when the crown is down, you typically just get rid of most of it, but then you make a really casual crown in it. So you got to be careful. So I would say do the opposite of the crown and then table saw it in a real situation. And now what I'm doing here is I'm using my domino joiner to join 2 boards at a time, and I'm just joking around there. The thing was all clogged up. Of course I have a vacuum, but I was too lazy to grab it, so I just kept blowing it out. Ultimately I get the vacuum. But I'm joining 2 boards. I need to join 8 boards in all, so I'm going to do 2, and then 2, and then 2, and then 2, and then 2 to 2, and then 2 to 2, and then 4 to 4. And that's how I'm going to do it. And that is good to do if you have the time. If you don't have the time, of course, you got to join them all at once and do one big glue up. But by doing the glue up the way I did it, that's how I was able to maintain more of a flatter table. Because it's easy to see when 2 boards aren't straight, and it's easy to keep them straight. And if I had to do all 8 at a time, that would be a complicated mess. And so here I am just joining these 2. And then you notice how I'm putting the clamps, I'm alternating them. The boards tend to belly up to the clamps or curve toward the clamps. So that's why I always alternate the clamps, because then the board doesn't know what to do. It's like, oh, should I go forward? Should I go backwards? Should I go forward? Should I go backwards? And it ends up staying straight. And so here I'm just joining more of them, using my ice pick to get some glue in there. And this ultimately was a really nice glue up, and so they're just kind of cutting through time. And now I'm going to join 2 to 2 and 2 to 2, and then of course I'm going to do 4 to 4, and then end up with one big board. And this is an interesting video. People really like this video. And interesting thing about it is I wasn't going to make this video because I owed my buddy money, and he said, oh, make me a tabletop. I said, sure, let's do it. And I was like, oh, I'm not going to make a video. And he's like, oh, make a video of it. I want to be able to show it off to the prospective buyers of the house. And he's like, okay, what the hell, I'll make the video. And around the same time, you see it in the background, the stroke sander showed up this week. It's there in the background right there. But I hadn't hooked it up yet, and I still wasn't exactly sure where it was going to go. And so that was one of the key features of this video, is me using the stroke sander for the very first time. That's 13 feet long. It runs on 223 phase, and I have the converter from American Rotary, so I can simply run the machine. And there you go now. So I do a little creative photography here where I'm like looking at it and then it cross dissolves into glued together. Like magic of photography. Boom, there it is, glued together. And when you use the domino joiner, you reference the top surface of every board, the surface it's going to face up. So the bottom is a bit zigzaggy, but the top is pretty close to being flat everywhere. So now we join the last glue up. And you see those horses I made a few months ago, maybe I guess a year ago. Those things have come in so handy, and because there's a lot of plywood in them, they're still very, very strong. Now I'm joining that together, and I have some really old clamps that I've had. They've been in my life since I could remember, and my dad bought those clamps when I was a little kid. As far as I could remember, those clamps have been in my life. I'm 52 years old. Those clamps have been around at least 50 years. Those steel, dark steel ones that I'm using. So I've had those my whole life. Pretty funny to think. And I remember about 10 years ago, my dad had them in his backyard. He's like, why don't you take these? I'm never going to use this stuff anymore. And so I used them a lot. And there's the glue up, and you could see I alternated. It was kind of a challenge to make sure that I didn't mess up my herringbone concept. Because at one point I was flip-flopped around, and I was like, oh, damn, I was positive I was paying attention to this. And I was, and I had one board just flipped around. Two board glue up. And now that's the DeWalt track saw. And people ask, why am I painting all my DeWalt tools white? It's because they don't talk to me anymore. I don't know why. Probably a budget thing. So I don't want to keep doing a commercial for them and getting paid one time. So that's just a simple solution to that. Just paint the tools white. If they want me back to do a commercial, they're just going to have to give me yellow tools. And so here you go. I cut that, and I used the track saw. And here, this is the stroke sander for the first time. Well, one thing as far as editing goes, my mistake was I didn't include one full body shot of me working on this. One full giant wide, which would have given it more context, because a lot of people are like, what the hell is this? They can't see the whole machine. And that was my fault. And you could see it leaves a beautiful finish. I was really focusing on the joints between the boards. And there, as you could see that little shot there where the boards underneath were not lined up. Typically I take a hand plane and just make the bottom edge, like the bottom 1 inch edge, match up across the ends of the boards. The top you hope is going to be matching because that's the top of a table. So this is nice, the stroke sander. You could focus on various parts, various joints. So that's what I'm doing there. The cat and the dog are running around. Now I'm using the Total Boat satin, and I learned a little thing from them this week. If you know this, don't think I'm an idiot, because I never really paid attention to this, but Total Boat keeps sending me gloss and satin and gloss and satin, and I have 20 cans of gloss. And I called them, I said, could you send me some satin? And they go, do you need gloss with that? I was like, I have gloss. I have 20 cans of gloss. And they said, oh, well, you use the gloss to build up, and then you use the satin as your final coat. And I didn't know that. Anyway, now here I'm just filling in. So I got one coat of paint on there to seal the wood. And now I'm putting epoxy in the cracks. I have tape underneath. A couple of knot holes went all the way through. So I'm filling those knot holes up with epoxy. And a couple of the cracks that I couldn't get rid of. And now I sand it one more time just to blend in the epoxy knots. And then, of course, I paint it. Vacuum up all the dust for the final paint. And this is like the third or fourth coat. I painted it a lot. Painting is really boring to watch. So that's basically it. I bring it over to the house 2 days later, which is where I shot this right here. And this is his spec house. He bought this house to sell. And I said, you know what, it's lucky that you did that, because most people wouldn't be daring enough to put a tabletop like this on a kitchen island. And I think it's cool. I personally would, but most people wouldn't. They think, oh, it's going to get crumbs in it. Anyway, thanks for watching. I really appreciate you guys supporting me here on Patreon.